Okay, we're here with Mr. Jerry Coley. And Mr. Coley, we appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. And Mr. Coley, what is your full name?
Jerry Wayne Coley.
And you went to high school where?
Forest Avenue High School.
And that's
Dallas.
in Dallas, okay. And you were born where?
Mount Pleasant, Texas.
Mount Pleasant, Texas. And did you grow up in Dallas or here in East Texas?
I moved to Dallas when I was about 2 months old, and I've lived in Dallas all my life until I retired and moved here to East Texas 3 years ago.
And were you living in Dallas County in 1963 while you worked for the Morning News?
Yes, I was.
And could you give us a little description of your career with the Morning News?
Yes, actually I started the Morning News when I was in high school in the mailing room, stacking papers. Graduated from high school and went into the accounting department. Was drafted into the Army in 1953, and I came out in 55 back to the news, and I went to work in payroll, and was about to leave the news to take a sales job, and they moved me upstairs to retail sales department, and I handled food and drug advertising. I did that for 10 years, and then I became a department store specialist and handled department store advertising for about 10 years, and then I became an assistant manager for about 10 years, and then I was retail sales manager for a couple, and then I was retail sales manager for a couple, and I was retail advertising director for about 5 years, I guess, when I retired in 1996, December, after 45 years.
That's quite a long time.
During that, well, they had a strike and the union struck in the press room, and I went to a special school and learned how to operate in the press room and worked the sales job and down there too, both to get us through until we could hire proper pressmen. So I had a little experience in
You were very versatile.
a big thing.
And how many years are required to get fully vested in their retirement program?
5. Back then it was 5.
And were you a member of the union?
No.
And you retired there in 1990?
96.
96,
December
okay.
31st.
And you did say you have a military background? That's
Yes,
correct?
I was in the United States Army. I was an intelligence specialist with the Air Defense of North America, stationed in Chicago for 2 years during the Korean War.
My dad was in the Korean War, artillery. We just want to make a fairly exact historic record here, and we want to be able to make absolutely clear that you are the same individual that spoke with Mr. Wallace Sheraton
Yes.
a few years ago when he wrote his book Unsolved Texas Mysteries.
Yes.
And we do have some questions that were prepared by Martin Barkley,
Okay.
who lives here in Texas, and if there's any questions that you feel that are not appropriate, that you don't want to answer, you're free to just say no comment.
I
Or,
don't anticipate that at all.
And you are the Jerry Coley that was featured in pages 37 to 54 of that book in the section titled The Pool of Vanishing Blood. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Coley, in your own words, as much specific memory as you can of that day that President Kennedy got shot, just 4 blocks from your office, if you would, could you give us an hour-by-hour run-through from about the time you drove into work that morning through that point at which you returned to your job from the brief vacation you took around Thanksgiving of '63?
Yes, that was a Friday morning. I usually got to work around 7:30. I came in, we had a cafeteria then on the second floor where our offices were, advertising. And I went down, usually I had coffee, occasionally with Don Campbell, who was in the food and drug. There were 2 of us handling that specialty advertising. And that particular morning he was having coffee with Jack Ruby, which was not unusual. He and Jack had coffee quite a bit, and I had a few times had coffee with him. This was about probably 8 o'clock. And sitting in there having coffee, chatting, and I remember Jack was one that always liked to talk about his girls and his prowess with women and on and on and on, but it was just a typical Jack Ruby and conversation that morning. Then about 8:30 I left and Don left, and we came back to our offices and we had accounts to go call on. And I left the office probably by 9. I don't remember seeing Jack at all that morning after the coffee shop. Went out in my territory and did my sales calls and was back at the news probably about 11. I had to come back early that day for a couple of reasons. They were reassigning parking places on the Dallas News, and I wanted to see the parade, the Kennedy as he come by. So I got back probably around 11 and somewhere in it. And Charlie Mulkey, a friend of mine who's an ad salesman, and I walked from the news. We had hoped to find a better place to watch. The place we wanted to stand at the corner of Main and I think that's Record that comes along there, was just jammed with people. So we moved on down about halfway down the block there, facing the Dealey fountain and all the water esplanade, whatever you call that. The jail, county jail parking area where they come in and pick up prisoners from the county jail. Well, about the time we moved down there, they were just putting a portable no parking sign on a concrete block. And I jumped up and I said, oh boy, now I can see above the crowd of people. And Lucky tried to get up there with me, but it wasn't room enough for two. He said, well, you got there first, you can stand there. So we were standing there as we could hear the parade, the motorcade coming. Remember him turning the corner and the applause was great. Passing by and then turning sharply right there on Elm to start down. And then I remember there was a noise. I don't remember them being gunshots. It echoed around in the buildings. There was a noise. I didn't look up at the depository. I had no idea. But I saw people running that way. So as the motorcade seemed to pause, we crossed the street and crossed over to this, I don't know what you call that over there, this esplanade, and started down that way back towards the picket fence up that grassy knoll where everybody was running back in there, back towards the railroad tracks. And as we got along about 3/4 of the way there, in front of the book depository along that walkway, a county sheriff's officer in a brown uniform. And he had a gun of some kind, a shotgun. I don't remember what it was, but his words were like, where are you guys going? I said, well, we want to go back and see what's going on. He said, get the hell out of here. At that time, Charlie and I believe, got separated. I don't remember how, but we got separated, and I started down those walkway when I went up on this big puddle of, I thought, of blood at the very top of the steps before you start down the steps. And I looked at it and I thought, wow. And then I looked out and people were crying, and I heard someone saying, well, the governor was shot, and then maybe even the president might have been shot. They didn't know. And as I crossed on down to the median between Elm and Main, that grassy area, I ran again and I saw Charlie. And he said, what happened? He said, I don't know. Let's go back to the news and see if we can find out. So we kind of ran back to the news. Went up to the second floor where our offices are. Jack Ruby was still sitting at the desk of John Noonan, who handled his advertising, back to my right, behind the row behind where I sat. And I said something about, I heard the president may have been shot. And I don't know where he got it right then, but I know he got up and moved back to the corner office, to the, I think about the second one, Dick Jeffrey's office. There was a TV on, and evidently there was some stuff coming on about this at that time. He got on the phone. I remember he was talking on the phone. Well, I decided I'm going to look for Jim Hood, who was an advertising photographer we had in our department. And Jim was just coming in the door just a few minutes later, and I grabbed Jim and I said, Jim, I think I found some blood or something at the top of the steps over there where the shooting was. He said, really? I said, yeah. He said, let me get my camera. He had I guess you call them reflex cameras, the old time. He got his camera, and as we started out the door, he looked back. I remember looking back, and Ruby was crying. He was still there on the phone crying. And Jim and I went down, back over to the steps. He bent down before he made a picture with his little finger, and it had already begun to crinkle, coagulate, I guess, and did this and said, boy, that's blood. You're right, that's blood. I didn't taste it. He did. And so he stepped back and made a photo of it. And he made a photo from the walkway looking down the steps at it. One photo is all he made.
Did anybody try to stop you?
No. By then, everybody had moved from the grassy knoll, and they were all back over towards the book depository then. This was probably, 45 minutes after the shooting, 30, 45 minutes.
Could you hold that picture up and point to where you saw the blood?
The blood is right at the top of these steps.
Could you hold it up? That would be...
Let me find it here.
Yes. Very good.
Right there at the top of those steps.
Very good. There we go. Okay.
No one said a thing to us. Best I remember, there wasn't too many people around. There were people all milling all over the place. There were still people out in this area, this grassy area out between Elm and Main Street. There were people out there. It seemed like there were still one or two motorcycles laying on their side, where they evidently, when this happened, they ran up this grassy knoll. But anyway, he came back to the news, and
how many pictures do you think he took?
He took one.
Just one. Okay.
Just one. And I'll tell you why I know just one when we get into another discussion. But let me see where I'm. This was, I don't know, 1, 2 o'clock in the. I don't know what time this was now. Couldn't tell you now. But it's on Friday. Rest of the day I had business to do and had to go back out and handle accounts. Well, I worked Friday nights as an extra job doing classified checking. And I was down that Friday night as we were killing ads left and right. I didn't help kill those ads, as I think Wallace may have said. No, I didn't do that. I was down there, but not in that capacity. I was a part-time job I had, checking classified advertising. So then, let's see, that was Friday. Sunday morning, we were sitting home, my family and I, watching the transfer of Ruby and right away, when he stepped forth, transferring Oswald, when Ruby stepped forth and shot, I recognized the hat and him right away. And my God, that was Jack Ruby. Monday morning, I came to work, and sometime that morning, Hugh Ainsworth, a reporter, who was a friend of Don Campbell's, who worked with me, and I knew Hugh. Someone had said that I was with Don that morning and had coffee with Ruby, and he was interested in the conversation and what Ruby had to say, and something about Ruby said he shot him. I don't know if it was him, but Ruby shot him because he was grieving for the president. And I remember telling you that I had a hard time with that, because if Jack Ruby loved the president, he'd have been down there with me at the parade, not sitting up here. So
Exactly.
I don't recall saying anything at all to Hugh Ainsworth about the blood. That time, I don't think our conversations were anything other than about Jack Ruby. So he ran on Tuesday morning in the Bulldog edition, which was a downtown street sales, probably 15,000 papers. I don't remember what that run was now. there was a story in which I was mentioned, Coley at the news. Exactly how it said I was involved, talking to Ruby or whatever. I don't recall now, these many years later. But I do know that ran Tuesday morning in some of the papers. And about noon or so, my wife called me just berserk. She was absolutely lost it. And she said, we're getting threatening phone calls here. They're threatening, if you don't shut up, they're going to kill me and the kids. And I said, do what? Who said that? I don't know. She said, I've had 3 already. Well, I think she had a couple more. The second one, the next one she had, she called me again, and she was really hysterical. So I went back, and my immediate boss wasn't in, but Cy Wagner was the vice president. I said, Cy, my wife's getting threatening phone calls, something about if I don't shut up, and I don't understand what's going on. And he said, my Lord, and this was Tuesday. And he said, why don't you, I'll tell you what, why don't you take a couple of days off and just get out of town? Take a couple of days off. You got somewhere you can go. And I said, my granddad lives in Mount Pleasant. He said, go. And I said, you're getting threatened. So I went home and got her family, and we went to Mount Pleasant. Stayed that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Came back home Saturday. The calls were gone. We didn't have any more. Of course, we're really shocked and scared.
Well, I can't blame you.
And then that Monday morning, I come to work, and right off the bat, I look up, and there's a guy setting up a camera and a tripod, and kind of a salty-looking old guy, and his name, he was with Life magazine. He said, I'm going to do a little, whoa! I jumped up and ran back to Si's office and said, Si, you know, I don't know what, I don't want to get in this stuff again. And he said, just a minute. He went up there and talked to him and ordered him out of the news. So he left.
Did you ever get his name?
No, I don't remember who he was now. I don't remember. He was a photographer, though, for life.
Well, I do want to say that these questions will give the viewers of this oral history video a chance to get up to speed about you and a couple of your co-workers' involvement in the pool of blood. And also, Mr. Coley, you did say earlier that you sat at the table with Ruby in the morning news cafeteria on the morning of the 22nd and left Ruby behind there in the building while you and Charlie Mulkey headed over to Dealey Plaza to watch the parade.
Right.
Can you pinpoint that time once again for us?
That we went to watch the parade. It was around, I think the motorcade came by somewhere around noon, didn't it? Must have been around 11 when we left, because we had to stop downstairs on the first floor personnel department. I had to draw a number for a new parking place. Mm-hmm. We did that, which was a terrible parking place. That upset me, because I had a great parking place. But anyway, it took about 5 minutes to walk from the news to where we were going. And then probably another 5 minutes to jostle for and finally get that good standing place to watch. So by then it must have been 11:30, 11:20. Somewhere around that time.
Yeah, right. And
one of the things I forgot to mention, though, is that before that parade came by, we were standing there, and it seemed like it wasn't long before the motorcade came by. This guy across the street in front of the water, on the sidewalk, there's a water...
reflecting pool type?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
It fell down, and he was having an epileptic fit. And he was... really having a fit, and then all of a sudden, boy, here come this ambulance right down Elm Street, pulled over there, stopped, and they loaded it in that ambulance, and zoom, they were down, I guess it's Record Street, across and out of sight. Just
they didn't go down Elm Street?
They came down Elm Street.
Okay.
Pick him up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And turned left on.
Okay.
I think that's Record. You know, my memory now is the streets downtown since I've been away from
The next block over is Record from Houston.
Houston Streets is where it's at. Came down, made a left on Houston Street, and went across the viaduct, I believe.
How long do you recollect it took the ambulance to get to this man?
Probably 3 or 4 minutes after he was having the fit, because it was just full blown going on when it pulled up. Which, like I said, boy, somebody must have.
Dropped the dial real quick.
And Mr. Coley, after you heard what turned out to be the shots toward President Kennedy, you and Charlie left this position that you marked on the map earlier and went where? To the...
We crossed the street between some of the motorcade. Started down this whole esplanade area, whatever you call this. And it was about, before you get to this big covered part here, is where the county sheriff stopped us at that point and said, you know, get the hell out of here. Because everybody was going back towards that fence in that corner back in there. So that's where we were headed.
Did you actually hear the shots? I mean, the actual...
Heard noises.
Yeah, but
I never
not
thought
a
about it.
timing or anything or
No,
sequence?
I couldn't tell you then, and I still don't know now. What it was, 3, 5, 10, I don't know. It was just pow.
And I believe you told Mr. Cheriton that by the time you and Charlie reached Elm and Houston, policemen were already beginning to control the crowds at that intersection?
I don't know that at all.
No?
I don't know where that came from.
Okay.
No, I don't, because I didn't notice anybody controlling anybody. All I saw, only people with control was Charlie and I, when the officer said, get out, they get the hell out of here.
This was after you got a glimpse of the blood already?
No, we were on our way back that way.
Okay.
And that's what forced me to turn and go that way then. When he
Okay,
said,
so
get out.
you were going out around,
We had headed
From
back
that-
towards that fence back in there and that parking lot back in there. That's where we were going, because people were all back in that
they
way.
didn't seem to mind you doing that, they just didn't want you,
They wanted to turn and get me back away from
I
that,
see.
that area.
And how long did it take you to run into the uniformed Dallas police officer who told you to get the hell out of here?
Probably after we crossed over the street and got on that side of there, we had to cross over. We actually had to cross there, cross Houston Street, and then cross Elm Street to get to that side. Probably from the time we left that, our standing point was 3 or 4 minutes, wasn't long at all.
Do you feel this man with the shotgun realized you and Charlie were entitled to approach the shooting area west of there? In other words, did you two identify yourself as employees of the Dallas Morning News?
No. As far as I knew, we were trespassing. I don't know. I didn't question what he said at all. I figured he's an officer, and we just got out of there.
So you weren't scared off by this demand exactly, but instead went along the east side of the Texas School Book Depository and turned left behind the building?
I was never behind him.
Never behind it, okay. And then you made a beeline to the grassy knoll area, and you were trying to approach earlier?
These questions were based upon Mr. Coley, what was written about Mr. Coley by Mr. Cheriton. So he's cleared up the fact that he did not go behind the school.
No,
Oh, okay.
never behind the
Okay.
building ever.
Okay.
I don't know how.
Yeah,
that-
so he's incorrect in that.
Yes, very much so. He also said in his story, people were running in the direction of the school book depository. No, they weren't either. Nobody was running in that direction.
I'm glad you added that.
Did you notice any activity behind the picket fence as you approached that area?
There were people back there, yes. There were people back there.
Have you or anyone close to you, Mr. Coley, studied this case closely or read more about it than the average person?
I don't think so. In fact, when we had our scare, tried to shut the whole thing out of my life, and did so for about 10 or 12 years.
Understandably so.
And that scare, you mean going to continue on?
Well, no, go ahead.
Oh, that scare came when I believe it was a Tuesday or Wednesday after this had happened. All had happened. Suddenly one day, two men appeared at my desk and said, held up little, I want to say green cards now. It said FBI, we'd like to talk to you.
And did he identify himself, or?
I don't know if he gave me his name, but he held up a card, and I just panicked right away. And so I'm back inside Wagner's office saying, good God help, Si, there's something. Now the FBI, they say they're from the FBI. And he said, sit down. So I sat down in his office while he went up to my desk, which is probably 50 or 60 feet up at the front of the room where I was sitting. And in a few minutes he came back and said, it's okay, you can talk to him. I said, okay. So I went back up there and he said, are you Jerry Coley, the Coley at the news that was identified such in a story? And I said, no, I'm Jerry Coley at the Dallas Morning News. He said, we'd like to talk to you. Somewhere private we can talk. And I said, we have a small conference room out here in front. So he said, let's go. So I went in there and they said, we'd like you to tell us about that day. So I started off about Ruby, and they were interested in Ruby and his reaction, my reaction, what happened, and so forth. And finally, I said, I'd like to ask you a question. And I said, okay. And the other one says, well, we're here to ask questions, not to answer. And I said, well, I'm very interested in some blood that I saw. He said, where? And I said, well, at the top of the steps. In fact, I got a photographer. He made a picture. He said, who is the photographer? And I said, it's Jim Hood. He said, where is he at? And I said, he's sitting outside the door here, just down. He said, go get him. You can get the camera and the film. So I went out and I said, Jim, the FBI wants to talk to you. He needs your camera, and he needs your positive, and he needs your negative. And now Jim has to develop these pictures. He was in advertising, so he didn't have priority in the photo room. He had to do his job when the other people. So it was probably a couple, 3 days before he actually got that film developed that he made that day. But in any case, Jim came in with his camera. He had that negative slide thing, or what it was, and the positive print of the blood. And laid it down. He said, yeah, boy. He said, you know, I tasted that, and I'd like to. And the guy said, we're here to talk to you boys. He said, you got any more prints? And Jim said, no, I made one print, not several. I made one shot, one print. This is it. And he took that brown envelope and he slid it back in there, and he took his negative, he put it in there, and he said, well, boys, this never happened. This conversation never took place, if you know what I mean. And they got up and they walked out. And Jim and I sat in there, and he said, good God, what are we into? I said, I don't know, but that's it. I'm through. I said, I've been threatened. My wife's been threatened. He said, I don't need to talk about this. I said, I don't need it, Jim. And that's why I was stunned when I read it. It said, Hugh Ainsworth, I had talked to him, because I don't think I talked to anybody. I was too scared to talk about this. But anyway.
You saw the picture that Mr. Hood took. You actually saw that, right?
Yes, I did see that then. But that's the first time I had seen it.
It was a good, clear depiction of the blood, as you remember seeing it.
Yeah, because it was a shot directly of the big stain there.
Nothing inconsistent with that photo from what you had seen.
None whatsoever.
You went back to see it even that Tuesday morning.
We did. We walked over that Tuesday, and there was no sign of anything. We couldn't find anything. No stains. And even as Hugh Ainsworth said, well, it was a pop bottle, and I found a broken bottle. I never heard that before either. But it was a pop bottle even. If it was a soda pop, it would have left some kind of stain, I would think, a red soda pop.
You would think it would almost take sandblasting or something to eradicate the blood.
It seemed like to me it would, because that wasn't a smooth textured, best I remember up there. That concrete was kind of coarse.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true what he wrote in the book, that you were alarmed by the quantity of blood you and Charlie came upon, and that's why you hustled back to the Dallas Morning News to grab a photographer?
I don't remember us being alarmed by it. I just remember it was a lot of blood. It wasn't just a small cut. There was a lot of blood there.
And then, is it true that on Tuesday, November 26th, you returned to view the blood stain again?
Yes.
And that was early that morning before you returned to work?
No, it was probably
Okay.
It was that morning sometime.
That's okay. And it had vanished in essence, correct?
There was no sign,
Yes.
any stain.
What is your guess, Mr. Coley? Do you feel that maybe a sandblaster was used? Are there industrial cleaners that strong, blood out of concrete, which is porous? What were your thoughts as you gazed at that suddenly clean
Well,
concrete?
to be truthful, I didn't think about a sandblaster, but I thought, probably some kind of strong industrial cleaner had to be used to get up that stain.
Just a side issue, Mr. Coley. Do you remember any little bench there close to the blood stain?
A bench. There may be backup. I don't remember any, but there could be backup in this area back. There's a wall here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little low wall as you were going into
Right.
the covered area. Most depictions of the plaza will show a bench there and at the opposite side of that covering.
I don't recall.
There's been some question as to whether that bench was actually there at that point in time of the assassination.
I don't recall seeing one, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. It couldn't be there, but I don't recall seeing
We
it.
just thought you might have seen it while you were in that area.
No. No, I did not.
Had you or Jim Hood mentioned the photos to anyone who could have alerted the FBI about the photographic evidence, maybe Charlie? Or
No. In fact, the first they knew about it, to our knowledge, was one I said, I'd like to ask something about. And he said, first, one man, there was two. One guy was conducting the interview, the other guy was sitting there taking notes. And
do you remember anything about what the FBI guys? Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you.
I don't remember.
I didn't mean to.
I was scared. No problem. I was scared. I was a young man who was scared, whose family been threatened, really, and I was scared to death. I was
Well, who wouldn't be?
absolutely terrified. No, I don't. But I really believe that the first they had heard about the blood, I don't believe anything about it, because they didn't ask anything about blood or anything in these conversations I had, which I was in there probably 10 or 15 minutes before I finally said, I want to ask you something about this blood that was up here. And that's when one of them, I remember, glanced at the other one. He said, tell us about blood. What blood?
Mr. Cheriton certainly handled that differently in his story, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He, when I read this, when Mark sent this to me, I read this and I no way. He had to talk to somebody else. Must have, or this is his own twist.
That's why I don't do books.
He talked about Jack Ruby hanging around the cafeteria and paying for his tab in a large bill, big enough to choke a horse. He carried those like that, but I didn't see him pay his bill. It says then he walks over to the classified advertising desk. That's downstairs.
Well, I've worked on this subject long enough to know it's easy enough to get details wrong sometimes, but I feel like it's very important. It's one of the great things about Mark's videos is to get the story from the man's mouth directly, and we want to try to establish as much exact detail as we can as researchers on this case.
Well, I'd like to go, if we're going to put this thing on, I'd like to go on record saying that it says in here, Wallace's story, that a uniformed Dallas police officer appeared. It was a brown uniform. Dallas police officers were blue or black. This was a brown uniform, which is the sheriff's department.
You had no doubt that this was the sheriff's department?
No doubt at all. It says, not to be denied, we circle behind the depository. No way. We'd go behind the depository. There's a street there, and then there's a depository, and then parking lot back over here. No, we just...
Did the FBI agents quoted in that book, did the FBI agents use the phrase, quote, someone just fell and got hurt, unquote? Is that correct?
No. That's one of the things
And there was no
says
doubt.
here, Jim focused his camera and took several pictures from different angles. He took one, but Jerry Coley looked around, saw no other evidence. Bull crap. Jerry Coley didn't look around at all. I wasn't looking for anything else.
And you were.
I had no reason to look for anything. I'm an ad salesman. I'm not a reporter.
And you were convinced of course, yourself that they were definitely FBI?
They looked like it to me, and I figured when the vice president of advertising said, yeah, they're FBI, it's okay to talk. That must have been. So I didn't worry anymore about that until they said, boys, this conversation never took place. This never happened.
Have you ever tried to acquire copies of the FBI report that should have been filed on?
No. I didn't do anything. And as I said, John Denham and I, who were good friends, John didn't even know any of this about any of this until long after he retired. And he read it somewhere. He might have read it in here, I don't know.
If you could get these files with your permission, would you like to see that, Mr. Coley?
Sure.
If we could get them?
You bet.
It'd be after 36 and a half years.
You bet I'd like to see them.
We're doing it every day with a lot of people, and it's quite interesting. Not denigrating the FBI at all. A lot of reports were written that just simply shed more light, just as you're doing today, with more facts to be known, so that we can piece together what may have been closer to the truth than what we were given.
I know after that interview with those people, two guys, I had made my mind up. I will never trust them again if that's the way, he's saying this didn't take place. I don't want to be any part of it.
I didn't really intend for this to be a part of the video, but it might be good that it is. I've wondered about you for many years and what parts of the story I did know about, knowing that you must have had a very hard time. I like to let people like yourself know that as a 13-year-old in Dallas, I was part of the Dallas law enforcement family. And both my father and my great uncle, who was the longest tenured detective on the Dallas Police Force that day, Robert E. Abbott, my family, the children in my family, were all warned this was not something to talk about. That's probably one of the reasons my fire as a researcher got lit on this. So you haven't been floating out there alone. There have been a lot of people in the same boat. I heard some things that very much got my attention, just like what the men that told you to act like it never happened. I feel for people like yourself. That was something no American citizen probably have to be put through.
Well, you can understand when that scared with that statement coming from the FBI. I thought, I don't intend. That's it. We're not going to talk about it. And I told my wife. She said, "That's it. Let's don't ever mention it again."
I don't blame you.
So it wasn't until after the ABC people contacted me, and I don't know, they'd gotten my name somehow, all this, and wanted to talk, and came down and did that interview with me on camera that night after work at the news, and we broke for some coffee because they were refilming, editing, doing some things, redoing it. Maybe I didn't. My voice didn't. It was raspy, like it always is anyway. Maybe they want to reshoot. I don't remember now, but I went over to call my wife, and I said, "We're just about through, but I think I'm gonna talk about the book." Oh, she just flipped out. "Oh, don't do it." I said, "No, wait a minute. I've been thinking, this thing's been on my mind for so long now, and Jim Hood's dead now, and Cy Wagner's dead, Don Campbell's dead, so people who could actually corroborate what this is, they're all dead, so I can talk about it now, because as far as I'm some nut. They throw that off." I said, "I'm not going to worry about it." I said, "I got to talk about it. I got to tell somebody." So I told those people, and they absolutely come unglued. We sat there then till about midnight. In fact, he said, "We want you to come next morning. We're going to set up over in the Dealey Plaza. We're going to get you off. We'd like to go over and film this." So they came in next morning, talked to my boss, and they walked over, and we spent probably 4 or 5 hours filming over there, talking about what went on. And
This is ABC or?
who was it? Unsolved Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries. I think it was Robert Stack and that group, you know. But,
And of course, the FBI runs that show.
did he? But anyway, all of a sudden, they called me that after this, I guess it's somewhere about noon, I came back to the news. About 3, they called that afternoon and said, we're going to run your story on such and such a date. Let me know when it was going to appear, but we can't use the blank date. Oh, that's okay. He said, yeah, there's nobody to back you up, and that's kind of far-fetched and out. I said, no problem. My wife will love it. And so that was the end of it.
This is so interesting because it sheds such a perfect light upon so many things. I've spent 30 years in and around Dallas as a Dallasite. What you just said illustrates so perfectly what I've run into 50 times in various situations of evidence. This is a strong piece of evidence that was not allowed into the public record. And there's a lot more out there.
Do you know,
We appreciate it. We
Sure.
really do appreciate it.
do you know that front page story I sent you about the lady that took the film? Remember I mailed you that? Front page, what Dallas Morning News is what, the 3rd largest newspaper in the country or 4th largest?
It's about 4th or 5th now. I don't
4th
know
or
what
5th?
it is.
We were never called by local radio, ABC, NBC, CBS, no universities, nothing. Fox Network was the only ones to interview us. So I know exactly what you mean.
Well, even at my paper, I was kind of ostracized because when it got to talking about that, I would talk about, after I talked about it finally, in the last few years, I'd say, boy, our newspaper reps out of Chicago, they'd come down and they'd take us to dinner, and we always went to Martin's to dinner. They all wanted to always me take them over there and show them where all this was, and I would. But I know our president at that time and executive editor Burl Osborne never seemed to care much for my discussions on this. I don't think anyone from the Dallas Morning News ever, other than that conversation I had with you, never talked to me else.
And like Earl Goals never?
No one was ever interested in my side. But I didn't care. That was all right with me.
I don't know if you would care to speculate on something that's impossible for us to know, but personally, I wonder what you think when you run up against Mr. Ainsworth talking about the soda pop bottle and how that must have affected you, having you being the one to.
Well, my feelings were hurt when I read this in here for him to discount it and say, yeah, Jerry Coley. I remember talking to Jerry about it. No, I don't now ever remember talking to you about the blood.
Well, the story on the soda pop bottle and Mr. Ainsworth's involvement in that came out considerably ahead of when you became aware of it, I'm sure. Because a lot of people were interested in the pool of blood, and that's how that story became discounted. And a lot of people like Mark and myself pretty much put it on the back burner. Simply, I did, because I knew that a job had been done on your story, and it would not pay to go looking closer at your story, at least that early.
Yeah, and I'm just noticing here, looking as we were talking, in Wallace's story, it says, Jerry Coley recognized the stranger as none other than Jack Ruby, shooting Oswald. Sensing his association with Ruby might be valuable, Coley went immediately to the office. Oh, crap. I never sensed my association with Jack Ruby was valuable to anyone, I never thought.
That's
That kind of makes me sound like I'm some kind of news hound. I mean, I was just a stupid advertising salesperson that didn't.
We don't want this to digress into personal stories, but Mark and I have been treated the same way by the press. So we understand that.
Like I said, that's why I do the videos.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put something in there that's not what they say.
But again, I'm sure Mr. Cheriton just taking some little literary.
Yeah, I went through it here in
Yeah.
Mark, and you may take this with you if you'd
Yeah.
like.
I'd love to.
I
I'd love to.
marked everything. I thought, gee, me, I went through it. No way.
I spoke a little bit with Mr. Sheridan for the public record. I've tried to speak to him about this because his note at the end of that chapter indicated to me somebody was seriously interested in this story. I tried to speak with Mr. Sheridan about it. I even wrote him a letter to talk further. He never responded to that letter. So I don't know whether his interest cooled, or I hope he didn't run into some of the same problems you did.
Well, I hope he didn't either.
I hope we don't.
Well, I would think at this time and age that you wouldn't, but
One of the things I was told on Thanksgiving Day after the assassination at Thanksgiving dinner by my veteran detective uncle and my father, actually this came out of my father's mouth, was that historians would not begin to understand the assassination for at least 30 years. And I noticed around the 30th anniversary of this case that a whole lot of new, unknown information started being available. I don't know if that means anything. That was just a happenstance statement of Dad. But he had a responsible position in law enforcement for the state of Texas at the time. So I knew at Thanksgiving dinner that if someone was to pursue something that was not wanted to be pursued, this is why your story has always struck a chord with me, because I know that was evidence. That was a crime scene, and it was not to be allowed to be known about.
well, I felt that way. I really, my wife and I have talked about it since all that, and, we've never wanted to make any money, do anything. I don't want any name, money. I don't want anything in life. All I wanted was for the truth to really finally come out of this whole thing, because if what my little involvement was, and for to have step on me and say shut up, you don't know anything, never happened. Don't worry about it. I wonder how many other people, bits and pieces, experience the same thing, maybe, or
Maybe nothing quite as direct as yours, or maybe something even more direct.
There was a police officer that said he found a bullet, or saw a bullet had hit the grass across the street from where you were, and he told the Warren Commission that, and they never investigated that. They left it out of the evidence. And that's physical evidence.
Yeah, the Warren Commission was, in my estimation, a quick whitewash of the whole thing.
They knew they had a period of time, and they had to get through that time and issue a report.
Because they just didn't interview anybody.
I don't even remember all my questions, though, about that.
Almost. Did you ever hear the early Associated Press story where they mentioned a Secret Service agent that was killed, or a dead Secret Service agent? Did you ever hear that, Mr. Coley?
No, I didn't.
There were early reports that, and I don't think Mr. Sheraton brought that up when he talked to you, that part.
You may not know it as well. But most good researchers are aware of some of the early press reports out of Dallas that day did note that a Secret Service man was killed there in the plaza.
In the plaza. Never knew that. Never. Wow.
I thought you might like that piece of information as well,
Wow.
because that, of course, has figured into my thinking quite a bit.
Well, it's interesting because this ABC crew, when they were filming that day when we were over there after the blood thing, they kept setting the camera up and kept talking about the proximity of that blood to the old fence at that time, and how quickly you could pull somebody over the fence and stick them in the trunk of a car. And he said, you think that happened? I said, gee, I hadn't even thought about that. I don't know. He said, well, there were people reported back here behind the fence. I said,
Could you describe for me, while we're still got the tape running, the corner of that picket fence that day?
Yeah, it was.
As where it meets at that
Yeah,
corner.
it was kind of
close
a
to
deteriorated fence at that back then.
Was there a gap there?
Yeah, there was. There was, the fence had some slats missing here and there. I don't remember the exact configuration of the fence, but I know it was there, and the blood got down there.
you remember if the fence had enough of a gap for people to squeeze through there rather than having to walk around it?
Some of those parts of that fence, I remember, back up to this way, back up towards the parking lot had some.
Mhm.
The part that faced Elm Street, I don't recall any missing slats. I just don't remember. I never looked for that.
But you remember that corner was in a deteriorated state
Yes,
to
it was.
some degree?
The fence was, yes, it was.
Okay. That's good information.
And that was an unpaved, it was an old, seemed like it was gravel back there now.
That's true. Certainly was.
Well, it was a parking lot back there.
That parking lot is interesting. One of the reasons we talk so much about the brown uniform rather than DPD uniform. That parking lot apparently was administered by the sheriff's department for their own employees.
I didn't know that.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
So,
In your years of advertising, did you ever have any associations with the sheriff's department or law enforcement or anything?
No, I was constable at one time.
you were.
Yeah. You know, one of those little cards you carry, they make you an honorary constable.
Did you happen to know Bill Decker? Oh,
Yes, a friend of mine knew Bill Decker.
Mhm.
He got me to carry that card.
but, could I ask you on your 2 years in Army Intelligence? I myself was in Army Intelligence as well.
Uh-huh.
Was this enlisted duty and officer status? Or?
They drug me in.
There you go.
I didn't volunteer. My fingernails haven't grown out yet from the. I scratched the sidewalk as they pulled
So
me in.
you were like me, did a lot of typing.
I came in and took basic training down in El Paso,
Uh-huh.
Fort Bliss, and they were shipping everybody out to Korea. And they came to me and another guy, and they said, "Move your billet. Bring your duffel bag and report down here to this barracks here." And it was empty. Everybody shipped out. And I lay there for 3 days, and finally they sent me to Chicago, Illinois. And I went directly to a gun battalion, 120 millimeter gun, set up in Argo, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And I was there for about 30 days because I pulled KP for 30 straight days there. I remember that. And they come and got me and brought me downtown. I had been cleared for secret. And so I went to work in the operations room of the Air Defense of Chicago, which you plotted all the flights of America. And after about 3 months there, or 4 months, they sent me back to El Paso for 6-month school to take Master Gunnery School, which is a forward observer in combat. I didn't know it at the time, but I came back from that, and then they made me a cryptograph operator. So I operated
Wow.
the cryptograph, and all I got was the missions out of SAC headquarters when they flew them over Chicago. And but that was my extent of that. I lived in a hotel, and our base was in the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, 12 stories below the ground.
Very good. Yeah. That's interesting because there's so many. Seems like an inordinate number of people almost in Dallas law enforcement that may be true with law enforcement everywhere that have Army intelligence connections. Just didn't know if there maybe knew some other people there in Dallas that were also.
I went to school with a lot of guys who went on the police force.
I know Joe Cody, I think, one of the detectives in the Dallas Police Department, had an extensive Army intelligence background. But I appreciate. I didn't think we'd get to the questions even this quick, but I'm done if you are.
Well, Mr. Coley, we would like to thank you very much for taking this time for the
Sure.
interview, and we will guaranteed send you a copy of this
You want to
video
see
and also a copy of that book. And yes, I would like to get a shot of. There we go. And that's a subpoena that you got for
Yes.
the trial of Jack Ruby,
That's correct.
and your name is on what part of it?
I'm listed as Coley, Advertising Department.
Uh-huh. Well, again, thank you very much, Mr. Coley. And
Surely.
we will send you a copy of this video, and also we'll replace that book for you. We'll get you another copy of that.
This. No,
Don't even need it.
I don't even want it because it's, you know, it's not right. And
I do appreciate Mr. Cheriton at least giving some kind of publicity to the story.
yeah, you know.